But I'll begin, and people can join as they go. Everyone knows me. I'm John from the Newcastle United Fans Against Sportswashing. And basically, we've been since the takeover organising against the sportswashing and against and pro human rights in Saudi Arabia. Lina's here, and also Nick, who've helped us a lot. And Lina was in Newcastle last September. And one of the things that Lina said when she was in Newcastle was that, actually, we contacted, following Nick's initiative, we got in contact with all the councillors and all the MPs, and we asked to meet them. And I think only two met. And Lina said, well, if it had been 5 years ago, we would have been having meetings all day. So they say that sportswashing is not effective, but obviously it's having an effect, that the elected representatives of the Northeast are not actually, prepared to say anything. And also, again, working with Nick and Lina and other Saudi human rights groups, we've taken up specific cases and said, will you mention this to the, have a meeting with Yasser Rumayyan, the chairman of Newcastle, and none of them have replied to do that. Now, what's happened recently is that basically we've had a little bit of a breakthrough. We did an open letter. An open letter means you publish it, you don't keep it private. And we sent it to all 77 Labour councillors, and we sent it to the MPs. It's been taken up by the press, and it's caused a little bit of controversy because we're basically asking, we're asking for four things, and I'll be very brief. The four things that we're asking, we're asking the councillors, MPs, and also fan groups as well. Will you work with us, local human rights groups and Saudi human rights advocates, to take up specific cases of human rights abuses with the Newcastle chairman Yasser Al-Rumayyan, who is also a sitting member in the Saudi government? The second thing that we're asked, will you publicly condemn the use of the death penalty, torture, oppression of women and the LGBT community, and suppression of basic human rights by the Saudi state? And will you support a call to Newcastle City Council to name a street near St James's Park in honour of Jamal Khashoggi and human rights? And the last one, will you support the match day protest on April the 27th, Newcastle United versus Sheffield United? Sheffield is United is owned by a Saudi prince, in solidarity with Salma al-Shabab, a Leeds University PhD student who was serving 27 years in prison for retweeting in favour of women's rights and free speech. Sheffield United are from Yorkshire, and that's where, Salma was studying at a Yorkshire university. And we are calling on Newcastle and Sheffield United fans to hold up posters of Salma in the 27th minute because she's in prison for 27 years. And that has caused a big stir. And one of the things that people who don't want to talk about sportswashing have said, why do we want to call a street Jamal Khashoggi near St James's Park? And so over to Lina, who I want to basically speak about, why Newcastle fans should, and importantly as well, the elected representatives should be bringing up cases of Salma and other women and young men and men who are imprisoned in Saudi Arabia. So I'll over to Lina for a few minutes. Thank you, Lina.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lina al-Hathloul. I'm a Saudi activist, and I'm with Al-Qist for Human Rights. I'm also the sister of Lina al-Hathloul, who was leading the fight for women to drive in Saudi Arabia, and who was imprisoned and tortured. John, I think, you've been working in the field now for quite a long time, and I think it's really important for people to be reminded of who the Saudi regime is and why it is important to have the voices of fans as allies, basically. Just to be very brief, the cases that we mention are very important because Saudi Arabia has turned into a complete police state, meaning that the arrests are arbitrary. People are sentenced behind closed doors. Prisons are not visited. Some even women are forcibly disappeared for years sometimes. So this whole environment, although the Saudi government has opened up to tourism and entertainment for the Saudi people, it has worsened in the sense that there are no institutions and that there are no legal procedures for anyone who has been arrested. And so when we talk about the case of Salma al-Shihab or Manahel, we it is they only have the voices of people abroad. So just to do the parallel with my sister Lujain, my sister, when Lujain, my sister, was arrested, she was first forcibly disappeared, and it was just impossible to know where she was. And then, because she was lucky enough to have her siblings abroad, we were able to speak. And why is my family not allowed to speak in Saudi Arabia? Because they put them on a travel ban, meaning they can't leave the country, and if they speak, they could potentially get arrested. So that maybe just gives you a clear idea on how the Saudi regime works. So it really managed to silence people inside the country because of collective punishment, because of arbitrary arrest, because of forced disappearances, and so on. So now the link to the discussion today. The thing is, the Saudi regime is not a separate entity from the Newcastle owners. It is the PIF, which is held by MBS, that are ruling the country. Basically, the owner of Newcastle now is the one who arrests and tortures women in Saudi Arabia. And so, in that context, I think that it's not only morally, but like, I think we also have to realize the dangers that come with emboldening and empowering and staying silent in the face of such a dictatorship. So, for example, just a very quick example: Saudi Arabia. So Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, did the impossible. I think no one would have dared to imprison the prime minister of a sovereign country. So when Lebanon's prime minister came to Saudi Arabia, he was arrested and forced to resign. Why? Because Saudi Arabia has leverage on Lebanon. And so, the more we allow the Saudi regime or MBS himself, to gain power in all impunity, it might backfire also on the UK and on democratic countries. So we really have to understand that this is not only about internal policies, like basic, not basic, but maybe just small human rights violations that could happen in any country. No, we are really feeding a monster that is unstoppable. So now the second question is, most fans think that their voices don't matter and that it's just so bigger than them and so on. I can assure you that the Saudi government, and again, just going back to sports washing for me personally is not about the intention of the Saudi state to use sports to whitewash its image. It is mainly the consequence of Saudi investment in sports, because I don't know what the intentions of the Saudi government is. Sometimes it's maybe really for economical reasons and so on. But what happens is that they manage to buy everyone's silence with the clubs. So this leads to sports washing in the sense that no one dares to speak about human rights abuses, and so it becomes sports washing. So maybe just to conclude, I think that everyone has the power to free a political prisoner in Saudi Arabia just by raising a picture and a name. The Saudi government is trying so hard to suffocate the information within the borders of Saudi Arabia. And the very fact that an information leaves the borders and is known by the public, it's already very embarrassing for them. So I can promise you that speaking about a political prisoner in Saudi Arabia can lead to them being freed, because Saudi Arabia wants its image to be clean, basically, for it to invest, to attract foreign investments, to be able to host events and so on. It wouldn't be able to do so if everyone knew about all these human rights abuses. So they're betting on everyone's ignorance and everyone's knowledge. So now that the information is out there, now we need to speak. So I really invite everyone to do their part of the job, and that and yeah, to understand and to be convinced that just speaking about human rights abuses and naming political prisoners is the only way we could protect them and free them. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Lina. Now, there's going to be an opportunity. As I said, we're not going to be here for hours and hours, but there'll be an opportunity to ask questions of Lina. But first, I want to introduce Nick McGeehan, who's from FairSquare. We've worked Newcastle United fans against sportswashing with Nick and FairSquare a lot, and they've done an excellent report called Easy Cities to Buy, which is really was a bit of a prediction of what's happened at Newcastle. It was comparing Manchester City's situation owned by the United Arab Emirates and Newcastle owned by the Saudi state. And I remember reading that report, and it made the point that local democracy could be eroded if the local representatives don't say anything about the states which are owning our football clubs. And recently we signed a letter on the initiative of FairSquare a letter to the government talking about the new football regulator and basically saying that really football clubs should not be owned by states, but especially, human rights abusing states. So I'll just ask Nick to speak, and then we can open it up for people to ask questions or to make comments. So over to you, Nick. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for all the work you're doing. Maybe I guess on that report you talked about, Easy Cities to Buy, what we tried to look at with that report was we looked at three groups. We looked at the media's role. We looked at the UK government's role in encouraging, state investment in football clubs. And the third thing, and probably the most significant thing, as you said, was looking at how local MPs and local politicians had responded to this takeover. And in general, I think they were supportive of the takeover. Some of them expressed some concerns about rights issues, but generally, I think they were encouraged to throw their weight behind it. There was a great quote by one of the politicians who said when the deal went through, she says, if you think this will stop me talking about rights abuses in Saudi Arabia, you don't know me and you don't know Newcastle. Well, I look back at that quote and I look at, for example, the article that Lina wrote a couple of days ago in The Guardian about, the situation that her sister's in and the situation that she's in. The fact that Lina can't go back to Saudi Arabia and her family can't get out of Saudi Arabia to see her. Well, the reality is that if local politicians in Newcastle stood up and said this is unacceptable and actually stood up to the people who run the club and said we want you to change that, one of two things would happen. Either that situation would be resolved or they would start to feel very, very uncomfortable about owning the club. And I think that's, politically speaking, the dynamics are that's why those people don't want to do that. They don't want to challenge this power base that the Saudis have carved out in Newcastle. Speaking, briefly about the broader issue of state ownership, because I think this is something that all supporters need to be concerned about. The much vaunted football governance bill and the independent football regulator that the British government intends to introduce for English football. When the white paper for that was announced in 2023, we wrote to the government because there was nothing in there about state ownership. And we tried to make the point to the government in this letter that this was a huge problem. And that while we commended their efforts to regulate English football and to get rid of dodgy owners, quote unquote, they were leaving the back door wide open for the most dodgy owners of all, which is to say states, to come in and take control of football clubs. And I think we outlined in that letter like some really solid arguments. We said, well, one, states are they're not like normal actors. They have powers that business people don't have. They've got the power to wage war, for example. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, that led to a huge shift in English football because it resulted in Roman Abramovich being kicked out of Chelsea. Well, the owners of Manchester City and the owners of Newcastle United have threatened to wage war against Qatar, which was prospectively for a while the owners of Manchester United. Now, it didn't happen, but that was something that was floating on in the background while while the governance bill was being discussed, and nobody made any mention of it. Multi-club ownership is a huge problem. It's bad for supporters, it's bad for clubs, it's bad for players, it's bad for the game. Manchester City has a multi-club ownership model in CFG, City Football Group. Amanda Staveley has talked about wanting one for Newcastle. Now, these are the things that happen out in the open. But what about multi-club ownership that happens in the shade? Nobody knows how Saudi Arabia, how Mohammed bin Salman moves his money around, or how the owners of Manchester City move their money around. That's the entire basis for the Premier League's 115 charges against them. There's lack of transparency and the ability of non-democratic, non-transparent states to shift money where they want to. So that poses a huge threat to the integrity of the game and the sustainability of the game, as does their financially destabilizing impact on the game. I mean, Manchester City have completely upturned the finances, you could say, not just of English football, but of European football, as of the Qataris at Paris Saint-Germain. And then there's the issue of sports washing, the use of clubs as branding vehicles, which we've talked about so much. Now, we wrote this letter to the British government in March 2023, and a month later, the forecast came true when Adam Crafton in The Athletic published his really quite remarkable article and groundbreaking article, which revealed the extent of British government meddling in the Saudi takeover of Newcastle United. I mean, the British government essentially, as was revealed in the emails published by The Athletic, said that they would provide the Premier League with the assurances that they were seeking over whether or not the PIF, the Public Investment Fund, was owned by the Saudi state. And shortly after that takeover went through. The most problematic aspect, I think, of the bill that has resulted from the white paper. We were concerned about the white paper. We said, it doesn't go far enough. You've got this big gap on state ownership. The bill goes further. The bill has a clause in it, clause 37, which says that any independent football regulator must have regard to the foreign and trade policy objectives of the UK government. So we're calling this regulator independent at the same time as when a state comes calling or a prospective owner comes calling, the regulator must, I think that the use of that word is really key, must go to the British government and assess what the foreign and trade policy objectives are. So essentially what we're doing now is opening the door to more state ownership, despite the fact that, despite the problems that are associated with it and that have been flagged as concerns, the British government seems to want to use English clubs as a tool of its foreign policy. And so the situations that Lina outlines in Saudi Arabia could be repeated from different states around the world. And so, yeah, it should be challenged. I mean, we saw recently that the British government took a stance against a foreign government, the government that owns Manchester City, the United Arab Emirates, against their attempts to take over the Telegraph newspapers, basically saying this is not in the interest of our national security and of our democracy to have our newspapers owned by foreign states. Why does that not apply to football clubs? We all understand how politically important they are and how critical they are to the social fabric of the nation and the communities and the supporters that they serve. And yet, while we are putting out this football governance bill proclaiming to defend these clubs from nefarious interference, we're absolutely leaving the door wide open to the most sinister interference of all, which is that which comes from states like Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates. Well, thanks, John. Thanks for giving me the chance to.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so if people are thinking of any questions that they might have for Lina and Nick, I'll just make a very, very brief comment about what's happening at the end of this month. Well, basically next week, because the theme both Lina and Nick mentioned that political representatives in the Northeast, councillors, MPs, but also fanzine editors and also the official fan groups, all said that they would, Nick used the phrase, they don't know Newcastle and we're going to keep talking about human rights. Now, we have to be completely honest. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. But that doesn't mean that Newcastle fans don't care about human rights. We've, as I said before at the beginning, we've had an article in the local press today, and it's caused quite a ferocious response because we're asking four things, putting four demands on the local representatives. And one of the things would be to actually, when they're approached by Saudi human rights groups to take up specific cases, then they should do it. Because up to now, they've ignored approaches from human rights groups who've said, will you say something about Salma al-Shabaab, or will you say something about the 9 young guys on death row? And they've refused. But we've done protests and we've done lobbies and we've handed in letters. And the breakthrough I think we've made today is that actually the mayor of the northern sort of region, Jamie Driscoll's, replied favourably, and he said they'll give us a statement to read out at a meeting that we're having next week, next Friday. And we've got the leader of the national president of the Bakers Union will be speaking, Ian Hodgson, Mustafa Kadri, who's from a human and labour rights group based on the Middle East, and Andrew Feinstein, who fights against the arms trade. There'll be other speakers as well, which we're not can't go into here, but I think that's going to be good. The other point is that where the match on next, not this Saturday, but Saturday after, is against Sheffield United. Now Sheffield United is owned by a Saudi prince who's not in the government, but is actually being involved in the Sportswashing project. So we've made an appeal to Sheffield United fans. We've been in touch with some of the fanzines and there's been some interest. But basically what we're asking is to do what Lina suggested, for fans to actually hold up a picture of Salma in the 27th minute. Now that's going to be you can download that from our site, or it'll be on Twitter. And also this week we're going to have our 4th edition of the fanzine coming out. So there's a lot happening, a lot of things for people to get involved in. So as I say, not to keep people for too long, if you want to make like a brief comment or ask a question, feel free. I think you have to indicate, and I'll keep my eye on the phone. And if no one, does anyone want to say anything or ask a question or anything? Anyone? I don't even know if people are asking and it's not appearing on the phone, but speak up. Speak up. Anyone? Okay. I can't see anyone indicating.
I think we're good, John.
Okay, sorry?
I think we're good.
Good. All right then. All right. Well, that's the final thing. So thank you. We just wanted to reach out to everyone and let everyone know what's going on. And that will be having a meeting next Friday. With all the details will be coming out. We're doing the press release tomorrow. That'll come out. And also the protest on. And basically, I'd ask everyone who's here tonight to follow all the information on Twitter and mainly in Twitter. Follow that and repost it all. And hopefully we'll have a great meeting on a week on Friday, and a protest on. And I think the final thing I would say to you, even if you're not from Newcastle and you can't be around the ground and you're not going to the game, even if you're not, we're going to appeal to everyone. Our thousands of people who follow us on Twitter. We're going to appeal to them to put the poster, the Free Salma poster, all over social media on Saturday, the 27th. And please encourage all your followers to do that. That'll be there to download, or you can copy it. But we'd ask everyone to do that. And in the 27th minute of the game, we will give you the details on the 27th. Okay. So thanks everyone for attending, and good luck. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Lina.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Bye-bye.